best without using the phone.
I told Linda Lopez that you were already sitting at the table, and that I was pretty sure that meant we would go first. And she said, yes, it's hard to kick the president or him out of his seat in your committee.
But let me tell you, there's an amendment, and so the secretary came to us, and we couldn't find what she was talking about. And so she was going to call upstairs and find out whose amendment it was. Because I said, I don't think it's my amendment.
Not our
I haven't put
amendment.
an amendment. The only amendment that I've seen is what Jerry Ortiz-Pino did on the DAs, but not. So this must be an amendment that.
I have to tell you this story because it has happened before. A court for the D.D. Waiver world. Same thing happened. They had a bill. It was all approved and stuff. And
Hey, Philip? No, he didn't see me.
Philip,
Philip. Oh, yes. We can call them the Bobbsey twins.
I call him Tweedledee and Tweedledee.
And I don't know where she went. It's the secretary, and she's trying to find out whose amendment this is, because it's not mine. That I'm aware of.
You've been busy. Well, you don't remember.
That's right.
Ready to get you a minute.
No. Maybe I'm like Allison this morning when she was going to send a text, and she said, I can't even figure out how to say it.
Oh,
She was
she was so tired. Listen, I've been there. Oh,
Yeah,
tired. Making sure I'm sending the right thing.
yeah. But you know, the nice thing about it yesterday was the boys were so, and their wives, they were so loving and sweet to both me and Allison.
Oh,
you know,
good.
which the older boy at one point was very resentful that Marion had gone out looking for Allison and found her. He didn't want anything to do with her, you know, just like this. But it was so nice that it was,
A very,
I mean, they kept saying, you know, you need to be up here. You need to be here with us. And it was really wonderful for her.
good. Good,
Yeah.
good, good.
It was great for her. Well, they keep coming in and leaving, going in and out.
They can't make up their mind.
They can't decide if they're a foot or a horseback.
I think they're not worried about our world. They're worried about the people sitting behind us.
I'm afraid to get up and leave and go and ask her whose amendment that was, for fear if I'm not sitting at the table. Nancy,
So I'm going to talk to the Albuquerque Economic Forum and the UNM Economic Forum, where they predict the economy, and I'm going to give a talk on Medicaid as a stimulus for the New Mexico economy, and why we should stop thinking of it as something that we don't want anyone on, and start thinking about it as a way to build our economy and our workforce with federal law.
I mean, it's health care,
Yeah, right.
you know.
With the Affordable Care Act between 2014 and 2017, New Mexico added 11,600 jobs, and 83% of those, or 10,500, I think, were healthcare jobs that were added because of the Affordable Care Act, because people had insurance.
Well, they're beginning. Here comes Bill Payne. I sure like him. I'm sorry he's not running again.
Oh, he isn't?
Sorry to hear that.
How come?
I think he's been here, what, 25 years, 26 years, whatever it is, you know, and I think
I like his polo. I think
Yeah.
Pete Campos is the source of those, and I keep forgetting to ask him where I can square one.
Then Martin Hickey will run for his seat.
Oh, I don't want Martin Hickey. Oh, God.
No comment.
Pete Campos makes his.
He does?
Yeah, he made one for Scott Scanlon. And the one that Bill Payne has, I have one of those.
I gotta get one.
And Tim Jennings gave it to me. He had one. Where Bill Payne got his was Tim Jennings had one made for. I think he had one made for me. He had one made for Stuart, and Stuart gave his to Bill Payne. And Tim wears one all the time. Mine is a little smaller than the one for the guys. And I might wear it tomorrow because tomorrow's turquoise day. I think he had them made over at Ortega's, if I'm not mistaken. I can find out. You want one with the New Mexico?
Yeah, right.
Let me ask Timmy where he had them made.
Okay.
I don't know where she is when she was going to go find out whose amendment that was.
Yeah, I wonder what happened.
There she is. Let's see if she'll look at me. There she goes again. In and out. I wanted to ask her whose amendment it is. I'm afraid to get up and leave. It doesn't make any difference if it's one of their amendments. She's got it drawn up and it's ready to go, so that's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Let me see.
Okay,
So,
Well, Mimi's not going to vote for it. She's going to not do a sunset. O'Neill's not going to do a sunset. Cervantes is not. Worth is not for sure. We'll see where. And I think Payne is not going to. So Bev Brigade called me the other day and asked me to be her sponsor. So whose amendment is it? Oh, it's Ivy Soto's amendment. He's always got to amend everybody's bill.
was that what you found out?
Huh?
What does it do or say?
I don't know. It was, what was it, section something?
Yeah, but it's not clear as to what it's saying, and if he wants that amendment,
Yeah.
is that that has to be something Ellen
It might be an
and
exchange
Jim.
for a vote, and then
Well, we'll see.
everything else.
Judiciary, we have an agenda that I hope everyone has access to. We're going to take some of the matters in an order that accommodates some of the members and their responsibilities elsewhere, as well as some of the guests here. I know it's a very crowded room. I hope the word's out that we have the Cannabis Regulation Act last in the evening. So if anybody's here for that, ideally you could give up your seat to others so that we can make some room. Otherwise, we'll hear that last and late in the evening. So I'm going to hear first Senator Papin on Senate Bill 128. Senator Papin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Excuse me. Mr. Chairman, the purpose of this bill is to remove the sunset provision of the Assisted Outpatient Treatment Act, which was enacted in 2016. Without this bill, the act would be repealed on July 1 of 2021. AOT has been successfully implemented in Albuquerque and Las Cruces, and without this bill, Albuquerque and Las Cruces would stand to lose $4 million and $3 million, respectively, for a total of $7 million of federal SAMHSA funds for AOT. The bill also expands the definition of assisted outpatient treatment to include comprehensive community support services and intensive outpatient services. This bill, as amended in the Public Affairs Committee, removed references to the district attorney as an additional party that may petition the court, which address the Attorney General's concerns. Currently, another New Mexico community is applying for a SAMHSA grant for AOT services, and that's Alamogordo. National studies have shown that when services are combined with long-term AOT, hospital admissions were reduced by 57%, and length of hospital stay was reduced by 20 days compared to individuals receiving their services without AOT. And Mr. Chairman, that's what this bill does. And I have with me Dr. Scrace, the chairman of Health and Humans of HSD, and Patsy Romero, who is with, it's not Easter Seals anymore. What's
Santa Maria.
Santa Maria. They've changed their name. So I have both of the expert. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. I believe everybody on this committee has heard the AOT bill before. We were part of its original passage. We've been through a lot of public testimony in the past, and we've dissected the bill at some length. So we're merely extending. Is there anyone here in opposition to Senate Bill 128? All right, and support? Okay, let me hear from I saw two hands in opposition, 1 to 2 minutes at most, please. Yes, ma'am. Yes, I recognize the young lady in opposition. I'm going to hear the opposition first, and we'll go to support.
Do I go up there? Or?
Just right where you're at.
Okay. So my name is Tara Bernheisel, and I don't know if it's for or against, but I'm just against the program. I'm not against the program, but I'm against the wording in the program. And I think that patients or citizens should be able to ask for AOT on their own without asking, without having to go through a doctor to do it or another person to do it. I think as an individual, if you're seeking help, you should be able to go and ask for the help yourself. And the wording in the brochure for AOT for the district court says that people that do not want help. So I was thinking like maybe if they could change the wording to say people that do want help and that individuals could refer themselves to the program, if that would be okay. And that's
What was your name again?
My name is Tara Bernheisel. Thank you.
Other, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Ellen Hines, representing the Disability Coalition. Ordinarily, when I am standing up on one of Senator Papen's mental health bills, I'm in support, so it is with great regret that I have to stand in opposition today. We oppose the repeal of the sunset on the AOT Act at this time. We believe it's premature. The only program, well, let me back up for just one moment. You very wisely included a sunset on this program because it was new when you enacted it. It's controversial. It didn't have a track record. And the purpose of including a sunset is that it allows you to evaluate the program before you put it permanently into state law. Unfortunately, you don't yet have the information that would enable you to evaluate it. The only program in New Mexico that's been in effect for any length of time is the one in Doñana County, which technically meaning of the act. Because one of the criteria you included in that statute was that the court must find that the individual who is the subject of the order must be unwilling or unlikely to participate in treatment voluntarily. However, in Doñana County, and we heard a detailed presentation on the program last fall to the Legislative Health and Human Services Committee in Las Cruces, and the people from the county and the court who are involved in the program made very clear that this is a voluntary program. The people who participate voluntarily, and as a result of being in the program, they get a wonderful array of services. And as a result, the outcomes of the program look pretty good. The only other program in New Mexico is the one in Albuquerque, in Bernalillo County, which only
This is
started in November,
what
so there's
Bonnie
really
and
no
the
track
county
record
sent
there at all.
as
It's
well.
happy.
They sent all
Thank you
of
very much.
this.
That's 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, supporters, I saw a couple of hands in the audience in support. Okay, carried.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Terry Cole. I'm President and CEO for the Greater Albuquerque Chamber of Commerce. I stand today in support of this bill on behalf of our board of directors and our organization. We too were very involved, Mr. Chair, and members of the committee in 2016 to pass the original bill. We think it's a very good bill for both potential victims of issues that happen in communities and that happened in 2016 that we were reeling from as a city. And it's also helpful, we think, to people who are challenged with mental health issues. So we support this bill and encourage you to support it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Was there one other hand in support? Yes, ma'am. We'll get to you in a second, Judge. Go ahead. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Betty Cisneros-Shover, and I'm the president of NAMI Santa Fe, National Alliance on Mental Illness. I'm here speaking in support of this legislation to remove the sunset clause. AOT has been successful, as Senator Pavin said, in Las Cruces over the last few years. Albuquerque is just getting started, and Santa Fe is in the interested stage. If the sunset clause is not removed in the session, the AOT statute of 2016, which we fought for 10 years to get, will be null and void on July 1, 2021, and will be taking a step backward, as we will no longer have a legal basis for this to operate. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Judge?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, we stand, I'm the Chief Judge of the Second Judicial District Court in Albuquerque, and we started the AOT program in October of this year, and as the gentle lady said, we haven't had a whole lot of time with it, but what we are seeing so far is tremendous success with the program. We know that the Las Cruces program has seen a tremendous amount of success as well. Certainly, we think that removing the sunset clause will give us some time to make sure that we have the time to evaluate the program in Albuquerque. It's a large district, and we'll have a lot of, I think we'll have a lot of data that we will provide for you. But we need the sunset clause removed so that we can continue with the program and keep the funding that we have to keep the program going forward. So thank you. We stand in support.
Thank you, Judge. All right, committee members. Senate 128. Motion for due pass. Senator Payne.
No, I'll be brief, Mr. Chairman, and I did talk to some of the opponents to the bill earlier, and I said, I'm not sure if you remove the sunset or don't remove the sunset, if they could work out an amendment that the sponsor supported, that I would run the amendment for them, but there hasn't been an agreement on amendment, and so I just want to let them know. I thought, I gave them an opportunity to work with the sponsor to come up with an amendment, but the sponsors told me that they want to remove the sunset. They believe the program's working, so I will support the bill. Thank you, Mr.
Other committee members? All right, we're on a due pass motion. Is there objection to the due pass motion? Right. Seeing none, all members present voting. Senator Payne, you have a due pass. Senate 128. Thank you. Didn't recognize my friends. Dr. Strace.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Senator Rodriguez, are you in the room someplace? No.
Finance.
Finance? Would you grab her? We're still trying to track down Padilla. I want to let him know before we announce. Senator Rodriguez, Senate 124.
Thank you for working me in, Greg. This nice lady, you want to come on up with me? And let's see. Oops, there we go. There. There we go. Awesome. Okay, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for hearing our bill. I have Greg Trapp here with me. He is the executive director for the Commission for the Blind. And of course, Callie Burma is also with us, and she is also she's the Skills Center coordinator for the Commission for the Blind. And this is a very simple but far-reaching bill because it purports to remove language, old dinosaur language, truly, that should not be in the law. From many years ago, there is a statute that requires New Mexico and the Commission for the Blind to have a registry of blind people in numbers in New Mexico. And there's a real problem with that because, first of all, it stigmatizes people who are blind. And the Commission for the Blind is a vocational rehabilitation agency that is responsible under the Federal Rehab Act to help blind persons become and remain employed. And the whole scenario here is about removing barriers and ensuring that blind people have the same opportunities as people that are non-blind and don't have visual impairments and that don't get singled out and stigmatized. So we are proposing to remove the language that requires them to have a register of blind persons in New Mexico, and I will turn it over to Greg Trapp, who is the director.
Senator Rodriguez, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, I know you have a very long evening ahead of you, so I'll be brief. As Senator Rodriguez stated, this language is really inconsistent with federal laws that have been passed since the Commission for the Blind Act was enacted in 1986. We have the Family Education Privacy Rights Act, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, GINA, which I think is probably most significant because a very significant portion of our consumers who are blind are visually impaired or are blind because of genetic conditions. So maintaining this registry not just keeps information in state hands about individuals who are blind, but also potentially their family members. So we're not just talking about tens of thousands of people, but potentially hundreds of thousands of people who might have information because of the mapping of the human genome, which took place after 1986. I'd like to turn the microphone over to our Skills Center coordinator, who will talk about the education at the earlier preschool and grade school levels. Kelly.
So in New Mexico, services for children and youth and young adults are identified by using child find services, which are part of education law. So this is done by the New Mexico School for the Blind and Visually Impaired, as well as the Public Education Department and local education entities.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone here in opposition to Senate 124? Anyone at all? All right. There's nobody here in the audience in opposition. Is there anyone here in support? Show of hands. All right, just a couple. Would you just introduce yourselves again, Ellen, and tell us? Anybody want a minute or two at most, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Ellen Hunt with the Disability Coalition again, and this time we are in support of the measure, and we are at your support. Thank you.
Thank you. Other support?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Jim Jackson for Disability Rights New Mexico. This bill does address some important privacy and confidentiality issues, and we support the bill.
Thank you. Anyone else in support? All right, committee members. Senator Payne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Greg spent more time up here this year than I have, and Kelly too, but always good to have you back up here and doing a great job down there, and I would just move to pass, Mr. Chairman.
Second. Motion second. Senator Martinez. Any other discussion, committee members? Senator objection to do pass motion. Seeing none, Senator Rodriguez, you have a due pass. Thank you for being here.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, appreciate
your work.
Thank you. All right, now I can walk with you. I'll walk with you.
Senate 95.
connect to each other here somehow, huh? Help. Take them out.
Hey, Janet, can you hand those out? Bill?
The only way they're double-sided.
No,
There's
good.
three of everything.
Good timing.
Okay.
Thanks. Just in time.
Senate 95, Senator Simon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Committee. Thanks for hearing the bill. Senate Bill 95 is an important bill because it seeks to add to an existing task force in law called the Radioactive Consultation Task Force that was set up at the time that we created the WIP, the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant, which of course is the nation's only low-level federal low-level waste nuclear waste plant. What we recognized at the time was that our state needed to be involved in looking at all the ways that operation could affect the state of New Mexico and make sure we had done our due diligence. And what we're now seeking to do is modernize that act to reflect the private proposal that is before the state to store high-level waste. And so what this act does is amends the Consultation Task Force to add to their mandate to look at private high-level nuclear waste and temporary storage. And of course, temporary in this application is up to 40 years. It also adds a very important state department, which is the Homeland Security Department, which did not exist at the time of the task force. All of this private proposed, high-level waste will be coming in via armed guard, top secret into the state of New Mexico. It's all going to be coming in via rail. I have for you a handout, a double-sided handout that's really important because what it shows is, number one, it's a page from Holtec themselves, from a presentation made to the Radioactive and Hazardous Materials Committee that I was the past chair of. And what it shows is that the emergency response preparedness, the emergency response, should there be an accident on these thousands of shipments into the state, is a responsibility of the state and local government. And this will be a shipping project of historic proportions for the country, shipping more high-level waste than has ever occurred, cumulatively multiples of, into the state of New Mexico, into southeastern New Mexico. You have on the backside it shows all the corridors coming in, and it will be coming in through all parts of New Mexico. Many communities in the state are very concerned about this. It, of course, creates exposure. But I will say, Mr. Chair, that but oil companies are opposed. Some oil companies are opposed to this. The Cattlemen's Association. A lot of concern just about how the proposal itself will impact the state. And so, but the bill itself is not a regulatory bill. The federal government has total primacy over regulating spent fuel. And it's not an oppositional bill. It simply is a due diligence bill that recognizing the state exposure that Holtec itself admits we have, that our state is actually going to get in the game of evaluating our exposure so it can better protect us. It's the right thing to do. Right now, this Holtec is applying for a license from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. It's expected to happen one way or another in the next year or two. The New Mexico Environment Department is a cooperating agency with the NRC. So this is all happening right now. And should this come to pass, it's essential that our state take off the blinders and understand all the various ways that we have exposure so that it can protect us, it can negotiate, or flat out oppose it. But we can be informed. So this bill is just common sense, due diligence. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to stand for questions. Opposition to the bill. Okay.
All right, so we'll hear a minute from everyone in the opposition of going through no more than 5 minutes. So if 5 of you speak faster, we'll hear more. Yes, opposition.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Brent Moore. I represent, I'm a registered lobbyist for the Eddie Lee Energy Alliance. So this is the city of Carlsbad, the city of Cobbs, Eddie County, Lee County. And what I would tell the committee is that there's a lot of local support for this project. The people down in the southeast corner have the WIP project, they have the Wrinkle project. They feel like there is local knowledge of these types of projects, and they believe that it would provide a real economic benefit. Because this is the Judiciary Committee, I would point the committee to some language that's in the existing act. I think that this gets at the core issue that this committee should consider. It's on page 5, lines 16 through approximately 20. It It's in Section 7 of the Act. And what it says is that the task force that was created for WIP will now be in a position to work on this project. And the task force shall negotiate for the state and the federal government in all areas relating to siting, licensing, and operation of new federal disposal facilities. The issue there is that the NRC preempts the field in this area. They are the licensing authority, and they are currently working on the license. And pushing this language into the existing act creates some real conflicts, creates some real situations where there could be a situation for challenges. I think it creates a misconception. We're more than happy to work with Senator Steinborn on some language in the statute that will allow for interface between the project and the state, and we're happy to work on that because we do want interaction with the state on this project. Thank you very much.
Up to 2 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, Gary King. I represent the Eddie Lee Energy Alliance and Holtec, but hopefully you all know that I have a lot of experience with nuclear waste and nuclear waste cleanup. I was policy advisor for environmental management at the U.S. Department of Energy and worked on the cleanup at Rocky Flats, for instance. I worked on cleanup of a number of spent fuel sites. This bill tries to do something that's really good, but it has several sort of significant flaws in the way it's drafted. And so my real point is that there are some fixes that really need to be made to this if you're serious about doing this. Most notably, one of the changes, I think, without the sponsor intending to do so, opens the door to requiring the task force to review every hazardous waste site in New Mexico, not just nuclear waste sites. I talked to the Secretary of the Environment Department about that, and it's not something that he's enthusiastic about doing, but I suppose that he would. The bill has mandatory language in it that says they'll review, but just so you'll know where it is, it's so on page 2. No, I've got it now. Page 2 on lines 1 and 2. You look at it includes in the definition of high-level waste temporary or permanent disposal of all hazardous waste. And so, right now, the way that statute works is it also says that they oversee federal facilities. And so, federal facilities that have hazardous waste, there's really only 1 or 2 in New Mexico, by and large, the labs and WIP. And that's what this was designed to deal with. But if you include language, which this bill does, to give them authority over privately owned sites, you actually, maybe without intending to loop it in, have looped in all temporary and permanent disposal sites for hazardous waste, plus nuclear waste, that's run by a private company. So that would include asbestos sites, it would include chromium sites, it would include potentially sites where there's been disposal of materials from dry cleaners. I mean, there are a lot of hazardous waste in New Mexico and a lot of hazardous waste disposal sites. So I really think that needs to be fixed.
Have you summarized? Thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate it. Other opposition? Yes. Go ahead. A minute or two, please.
Chairman, hi, my name is Wendy Austin, and I'm the Deputy City Manager for the City of Carlsbad. The City of Carlsbad supports this project, and in addition, the City of Carlsbad City Council has passed multiple resolutions in support of the project, and we oppose this bill. Thank you.
Thank you for being brief. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, my name is George Scott. I'm with Holtec. I represent Holtec here in New Mexico. I echo many of the sentiments that the previous speakers spoke about, including Brent about federal preemption. So I'm not going to get into that. I do want to say one thing. Senator Steinborn has a slide from 2 years ago. Since then, we've updated that. Holtec would take responsibility. I've said this at Senate Conservation also. Holtec will take responsibility for any actions that happen. So, thank you.
Opposition on the other side of the room? Other opposition? Yes.
No.
Yes, opposition.
Oh, no.
All right. Any other opposition? Yes, one more.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Jerry Fanning, the Director of Government Relations for Eddy County. September 4th, 2018, the Eddy County Commission adopted Resolution R-1873. This resolution supported the Holtec International's effort to build an interim storage facility for spent nuclear fuel in southeast New Mexico and becoming a party to the NRC adjudicated hearing. Eddy County, we're very proud of our history as a national leader in supporting safe transportation and storage of nuclear waste. We live there. We live with it. We believe it's handled safe. We believe that the regulatory agencies that oversee the handling of nuclear waste are doing their jobs. We believe there's more information needed before decisions made. We do not believe that this piece of legislation does that, but we do look forward to working in the future, being able to resolve those issues as they arise, and want to be a partner in making sure that things are safe in southeast New Mexico and for all New Mexicans. But we do stand in opposition of this bill.
Thank you, sir. Supporters, this side of the room, let's see, we got a lot of hands. 1 minute, no more. Yes.
Chairman and committee, my name is Cynthia Wheeler. I'm a New Mexican. This is not a partisan issue. This is a New Mexican issue. This bill attempts to keep New Mexicans safe from risk while very dangerous materials are being used, stored, and cited. These materials, when accidentally released to the environment, can cause miscarriages, genetic damage to cattle, to agricultural crops, to very important industries in New Mexico. We elected you to protect us from risks above all, and we need you now.
Thank you. Yes.
Patricia Cardona, Honorable Chairperson and committee members. I stand here in support of Senator Steinborn's bill, which is Senate Bill 95. The Rio Grande chapter of the Sierra Club has 10,000 members. We are very concerned about having the ability to examine the science of the storage, transport, and health impacts, as well as the economic impacts to southeastern New Mexico by importing high-level nuclear waste, which is the most dangerous waste in this country. We urge you to adopt this bill. If there's fine-tuning that needs to be done later, then we can look at it later, but right now, we really do believe it needs to be adopted.
Thank you very much. Yes, support.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I'm Scott Kovac with Nuclear Watch New Mexico. I wholeheartedly support this bill. Currently, the federal agencies, the Department of Energy and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, have the main authority over radioactive waste and materials in New Mexico. The ideas set forth in this bill will give the state more say in its nuclear future. There are plans to send all the nation's commercial radioactive waste to New Mexico. We need to do all we can to allow New Mexico to have more input. If nothing else, this bill adds a provision that the task force can look at spent fuel rods. The reason it wasn't in the original bill was because New Mexico has no commercial reactors. We weren't planning on having to store spent fuel rods in the country and in the state. And now we're looking at taking all the country's spent fuel rods. Thank you.
Others, yes.
Mr. Chair, committee members, my name is Sue Skirman. I'm with the Nuclear Issues Study Group in Albuquerque. We support this bill 100%. I'll be very brief. It's very dangerous cargo, and we recommend that there be a task force in place to do due diligence. It would be irresponsible not to. Thank you very much.
Other support? Yes.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Greg Peters. I'm the Public Lands and Wildlife Advocate for Conservation Voters New Mexico. I'll be brief. CVNM wholeheartedly supports this bill. Specifically, we support the addition of Secretaries of Homeland Security and Emergency Management to the Consultation Task Force. We also wholly support private nuclear waste facilities to the facilities whose license applications the task force reviews for public safety, environmental, health, infrastructure, transportation impacts, and requirements. And we also fully support a reporting requirement for these reviews. Thank you.
Anyone else on this side of the room support? All right, next side of the room from front to back. Yes, sir.
I'm George Jones, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I'm a citizen of Santa Fe, New Mexico. High energy level nuclear waste is the most dangerous nuclear waste that can be found. It comes out of our commercial nuclear power plants. It is very dangerous, and it deserves every careful consideration with respect to safety. One of the keys to safety and quality in any industry is to have independent and objective components of oversight. The state government needs to be involved. I support this bill 100%.
Thank you. Let's go back. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. 1 minute.
Thank you. Honored to put out my opinion here today. My name is Barney McGrath, and I am a member of an ad hoc advisory group called the Nuclear Safety Advocates Group. I would like you to support Senate Bill 95 because it will help establish state oversight and guidelines over civilian nuclear waste projects. We do not believe that this is an anti-Holtec bill. We are looking at the future, and we think that there will be lots of other players that want to dispose of nuclear waste in New Mexico. Therefore, we think that this is a very important milestone to have some oversight. In fact, I would like to point out and remind you that there currently exists a nuclear waste project with state oversight in New Mexico. This is it. This is called the Los Alamos Legacy Waste Project. And the people who have authority over the final say on what happens to this waste is the New Mexico Environment Department.
Thank you, Mr. McGrath. That's your time.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, my name is June Farrell, and I'm also a member of the Nuclear Safety Advocates Group. I support this bill, and I'm asking you to support it because it's stewardship. You are all stewards for us here in New Mexico. We elect you to look after our state and after the interests of our state. That's why I think this bill gives you a means to do that with a task force. We're not against Holtec. That's not why we're here. We're not talking about if it's a good project or not. We're saying that we need state oversight, and we need you to think about our interests in this state, not just corporate interests. So for that reason, I'm saying this is a very important bill. Please support it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Others, yes. Yes. Oh.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I'm Jim Kenny, the Environment Secretary, and we stand in support of this bill. It would allow the existing task force the option to expand, or it would give the existing task force the option to expand and look at commercial waste as well, and provide the legislature as well as the governor with recommendations. So again, we stand in support of the bill. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I'm the Reverend Holly Bohan with Interfaith Work for Justice New Mexico. I'm also speaking on behalf of concerned citizens for nuclear safety, and we provided you with a handout that shows the projected waste that was anticipated to be generated just by Lannon from 2007 to 2016, which I would refer you to. It is sobering to see what they were projecting to generate. And I would also point out to you that the Trump administration has just announced their intentions to cut cleanup at Lannon by 46% and to increase nuclear weapons production by 57%. We need this task force more than ever. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I know there are a number more of you would like to speak. We've gone 15 minutes with equal amounts of time in support and opposition, so we'll go to the committee at this point in time. Committee members, questions or comments? You're always going first, Senator Payne.
I wade into everything here. I mean, I sort of agree with the opponents of the bill. The bill really doesn't do anything, in my estimation. We have an existing task force. The task force, and really the key language is on page 5, the duties of the task force. They already can do almost everything everyone says we should be doing in the state. The problem I've got with the bill is I think General King is correct. It does expand statutorily what could be some confusing oversight of all waste within the state, not just any nuclear waste. But the biggest problem I've had, and I think this is the key to the bill, and it's on page 6, paragraph C, I don't think we can write a statute requiring our task force and/or the agency they work for to review something that's preempted by federal law. We can put it in law, and what'll happen, and this is what happens around here. I think a lot of you folks, maybe you haven't been around here very long, but this is what happens. We'll write a statutory requirement on a state agency and say, you must do this. And then they'll go to the feds and say, hey, you got to give me this. My law says I get to review it. And the feds just blink at you, going, well, you don't have any legal authority to review it. So what happens then, some advocacy group will come out there and they will either sue the state or they'll sue the feds saying, gee, they're not following the statutory requirement you guys set in law. And then you'll go through a year of discovery and this and that, and the feds will move to dismiss or something, and then it'll be appealed. Invariably it gets appealed, and eventually, and so what you do is you slow everything down 2 or 3 years while it's in the litigation process. Doing something, every analysis I've seen here says we're already preempted from doing. The task force already can request to do all these things. They can collaborate with the federal government to do everything. That's already the parade of horribles here, but what we can't do is direct the federal government to do anything that we're preempted by federal law from doing. So we've heard this bill before, so the sponsor and I have had this discussion, I think, but I'll leave that at that, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I respectfully disagree with my good friend to the right here. Looking at the language on page 6, section C, we're not telling the federal government anything here. What we're doing is reviewing their applications and evaluating the public safety, environmental health, infrastructure, and transportation impacts and requirements of the proposed facilities. So we're reviewing it, and then we're transmitting those findings to the legislature, the governor, and the relevant executive departments. I think the reality is there's going to be a state impact here. And so this task force already exists. If this was a federal facility, it would be going through this process. This is one of those issues where, and I've actually gone back in and amended a number of bills because of, either a public-private partnership, or now we're privatizing something that used to only be done by the federal government. My guess is that in 1981, when this was passed, no one would ever have imagined a private company doing this. So again, we're not telling the federal government. We can't tell the federal government here if we're preempted. No, it shall review. All we're doing is reviewing, and then look what it says: reporting to the governor and relevant executive departments. I mean, that's within the state. That's letting the Secretary of the Environment Department know what's going on, so that we may want to know, what can we do here if this is going to go forward? We may want to appropriate money for certain things to again protect the citizens of our state. So this just seems to be another set of eyes looking at this on behalf of the citizens of our state. And again, do we really want the federal government here to do this with no input whatsoever, when I think there's no question, in my opinion, that there's an impact? So I don't really have a question. I heard this bill already. I'm going to vote for it. And again, I just think it's another set of eyes taking a look. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Other committee input?
Mr. Chairman.
I just have a question, Senator, and maybe for anybody who can answer this. The issue for me is the task force shall review the license application. Is the license application of public information entirely? So we're just telling the task force to look at what's already public? Is that right? We're not giving them any authority to review anything or see anything that's not public? All right, good. Thank you. Other committee questions? Senator Baca.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator. My question is about its impact on other facilities. I think I understand what it's doing. I guess I would think that it says it shall review this license. I would think it can review it right now if it's public record. Is that true?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, thanks for the question. Our state government can do anything it wants. I think what we're doing, though, is we're building in a mechanism where we're requiring that level of response to something that has very profound impacts to our state. This is a 40-year license with no end game in sight. Yucca Mountain is the permanent repository designated nationally that now was stopped several years ago by our last president. Congress can't agree on so we're talking about something here they can do, but they haven't done. And just for a little history, the last administration, Secretary Kenny, or excuse me, not Secretary McQueen, our last energy secretary, said I don't have any mandate as a state to do this work. And that is why our administration has done no review on this proposal. The law requires only federal facilities. And I asked him as the past chair of the committee, would you recommend that we add private facilities? His answer is yes. So yes, they can do it, but it's something that we need to mandate they do it, because right now it's Holtec. Tomorrow it could be some reprocessing facility. It could be any number of facilities, and I understand we have some parts of New Mexico that really embrace this cluster, and that's good for them. But this is important for them and for us that we do this level of review, as we saw the wisdom to do for WIP, that we should do it now for Holtec, and we shall have the statute in place for future projects that may come our way.
I guess, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator. Thank you did come and speak to me before the bill, and I appreciate all the points you put across to me. I guess my other concern, and maybe I didn't hear you address it quite like I would have wanted to, was low-level facilities. So now low-level facilities, it sounds like, are caught up into this same mechanism that are already being I guess not regulated. You corrected me with that, but there is some oversight on them, and we would be changing them to this new requirement, which would require the task force to do A, B, C, D, and all the things that are listed in here.
So, thank you, Mr. Chairman, Senator. So the bill already includes transuranic waste, which is the lower level military waste, and for federal facilities. So the bill, the initial law, was created for WIP, because that's what WIP accepts. What we're doing here is we're not changing that. We're simply adding to the mandate of the task force to include high-level waste and temporary waste, which is the application that's sought. It's for interim storage. So we're not changing the existing mandate. We're adding to it high-level.
So, in
essence,
essence,
at a private facility.
In essence, Mr. Chair, we are changing the mandate, though. The mandate now will be extended to really every waste facility we have where nuclear waste is present.
Mr. Chair, no. I mean, we're just adding what we're adding, which is high-level private facilities. There's only one application right now before us that meets that application. Everything else here is existing statute. So, with all due respect, and that's what we're dealing with here. And in fact, WIP has happened so long ago. This task force hadn't even met until we asked them for a report, because the existing law says they're supposed to report to us regularly. Well, that meant under the last administration never, which is why we're changing that to annually in this bill as well. So they're not overworked, this task force, by any means. We're kind of giving them one new project right now, and that's Holtec. But they're not actively necessarily reviewing any other work. And but we think it's a good thing. I mean, as the Majority Leader said, this is just more eyes looking at stuff that's really important to our state. But Holtec seems to be the only new ramification of this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator. And thank you for our conversation earlier today. I think most of my questions that I had after we talked have been answered, except for on the fiscal impacts. It looks like there's 3 new FTEs required for this and about $500,000 más o menos of new spending. Is that in House Bill 2, or how is that going to be covered?
So, Mr. Chairman, Senator, that is a great question, and I would defer to...
Of course it is. I asked it, Mr. Chair.
Indeed. So, Mr. Chairman, if I could defer to Secretary Kennedy to answer that. He's still in the room. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman and Senator, that was a great question. So part of our fiscal impact analysis relates to the fact that the bill has a emergency provision, and it would become effective, and depending upon what the expectation was amongst the task force and what we had to do with the legislature and the governor, we were anticipating that we had to do a full-on analysis as quickly as possible. I've since talked to the sponsor about that and got some clarification as to how this would play out. Further, we are a cooperating agency with the NRC on the Holtec matter, and we've undertaken a lot of effort this year to understand what they're working on with the environmental impact statement. So part of our projection was based on the work we've done, and then thinking about another facility we're trying to picture what it would cost the department. So that's a little bit of background on our disclosure.
Mr. Chair, Senator, Secretary, I've never seen an FIR from a state agency that doesn't require 3 FTEs and about $500,000, so that's pretty standard. Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Secretary. Thank you, Chair.
Motions?
But he didn't answer my second part. Is it an HB2?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, no, it's not. And ultimately, it was deemed, the feedback I got from the department was they can work with what they have right now, and they've got some other funding coming in that's a little flexible, so.
Can people speak up? It's really hard for us to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, we get that complaint about Senator Moore's a lot. Soft-spoken sort of guy. So, the task force consists of the Secretaries of Energy, Minerals, Natural Resources, Health, Environment, Public Safety, Transportation. This would add Homeland Security and Emergency Management. That's it. These are all cabinet level or such. So it's hard for me to imagine why you need to add additional employees and a big appropriation to have cabinet secretaries meet to review an application and make recommendations. So it seems like a pretty innocuous process to me. So, Senator Stewart, something more?
I move a do pass on Senate Bill 95.
Sorry, a little louder there, Senator Stewart.
I move a do pass on Senate Bill 95.
You're right, Senator O'Neill, got a second?
Second.
Very good, thank you. Further committee discussion? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Senator Baca. Senator Griggs.
No.
Senator Lopez.
Yes.
Senator Martinez. Senator Moores.
No.
Senator O'Neill.
Yes.
Senator Payne.
No.
Senator Stewart.
Yes.
Senator Worth.
Yes.
Senator Baca. Senator Cervantes.
Yes.
Tied.
It's a tie vote. Senator, we don't have a do pass right now. We'll have to roll that over. That's the vote.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for traveling a long way. Senator Stewart.
Quietly leave, please.
Do we have 9?
I got the same
We're
vote.
10.
I got the same count too.
I'm sorry.
No, you had it. You had it. Senator Lopez.
Quiet, please.
Senator Lopez, my understanding, I hadn't conferred with you, but my understanding is you have a motion. Is that right? Let's have your motion at this point in time so we can take care of that business, can we?
Mr. Chairman, having voted in the majority, I would like to remove Senate Bill 110 from the table and place it on the agenda for consideration.
Okay. Discussion on the motion. All right, Senator Payne.
Mr. Chairman, I know there's been work on that, but when we table a bill, usually if you take a bill off the table, you take the original bill off and we reconsider that bill. If this bill is a different bill or been changed substantially, I don't think it's an appropriate motion to just bring it back for action. I think it needs to have 24 hours advance notice for review of everybody that changes. So, I mean, if this is a different changed bill, and I understand there was some working group that none of us knew about, but I don't think it's appropriate to take a bill off the table that's not the bill we tabled originally to discuss. So,
Other discussion? So just for clarification, I understand the motion to be simply to remove it from the table, put it up for action, and we'll take about when that'll happen. I think that'll be the prerogative of the chair. So I understand the motion only to make it off the table, and I think it's an appropriate motion. Other committee discussion? Senator Stewart.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'll just remind the committee that it was a substitute. It was a Senate Judiciary Committee substitute, which is always open for us to work on. So I support the motion.
Other discussion? Senator Baca.
Mr. Chair, I would respectfully oppose the motion. Otherwise, each time we table a bill, it can be immediately brought back and without being placed on any sort of calendar for supporters or opposition to be here. So with that, that would be my 2 cents. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Baca, that's not my understanding of the motion. My understanding of the motion is to simply remove it from the table. I think the committee heard me earlier in the session that to the extent we can, with timing, that I will try and take matters when they come off the table and put them on agenda so there is a fair opportunity for a hearing, so I don't understand the motion to be inconsistent with that. So, just for clarification, my only understanding right now is the motion is to remove it from the table, and then the chair will schedule it. And as I told you all, and I believe I've had a chance to confer with leadership on both sides, including the ranking member on the minority, my intention would be to schedule this for our next scheduled meeting, so there is an agenda and a fair opportunity to be heard. That's my intention as the chair, for clarification. Senator Morris, did you have?
That was actually my question, Mr. Chair, that particular point.
Trying to be consistent with what I told the committee I would do and the way I would run the meetings. Again, that may not always be possible as we get closer to the end of the session, but I've conferred with the members, and I think there is a fair opportunity to hear this on Friday and not be the death of the bill in doing so. So, other members, committee, on the motion.
Chairman, just to be clear, though, the bill you're removing from the table now is a substitute bill when we, in fact, tabled a different bill. This will be a substitute bill that will be out for review, not the original bill that was tabled. Is that correct? You're the sponsor. You have a substitute bill. We're taking a substitute bill off the table, not the original bill. Is it the original bill?
We're taking the bill that's been tabled off the table, right? Then that bill will be before the committee on an agenda and to be substituted.
It's going to be substituted.
And Mr. Chair, then if there is to be a substitute bill, when will that substitution be available for people that want to review it?
So, Senator, as you're aware, oftentimes we get a substitute bill for the very first time we're in the middle of a meeting. When I've carried a bill, sometimes it's been my effort to try and get that to folks in advance. So that'll be up to the sponsor. That'll be up to Senator Stewart, really, when the substitute is available. But right now, the only motion is take the existing bill that was tabled, take it off the table. That's the only motion that's before us. And I've told you my intentions about scheduling it. On the motion? All right, roll call, please.
Senator Baca.
No.
Senator Griggs.
Yes.
Senator Lopez.
Yes.
Senator Martinez.
Yes.
Senator Moores.
No.
Senator O'Neill.
Yes.
Senator Payne.
No.
Senator Stewart. Senator Worth.
Yes.
Senator Cervantes.
Yes, that motion passes. My intention is to schedule that bill for the first item of our agenda on Friday. All right, Senator Lopez?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Stewart? All right. For those that were here on Senate Bill 110. Senate Bill 131, Senator Lopez. I saw Senator Ramos. Senator Ramos. Senator Lopez.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My co-sponsor and I sit here and, of course, allow you to say a few words, too. We are sitting here in front of you with Senate Bill 131, the Tobacco Products Act. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, the proposed legislation in front of you is consistent with newly signed legislation that raised the federal minimum age of sale of tobacco products to 21. The law was signed on December 20th, 2019, that did amend the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act that raised the federal minimum age of sale of tobacco products from 18 to 21. It is now illegal for a retailer to sell any tobacco product, including cigarettes, cigars, and e-cigarettes, to anyone under 21. Federal definition of tobacco product is comprehensive. To be effective, consistent regulations need to apply to all tobacco products. And Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, the New Mexico minimum age of sale laws must meet the federal regulation. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, what this bill is doing is actually setting up a regulatory process which we don't currently have. It mirrors similar to kind of what we do with the Liquor Control Act, but this, of course, is going to be the tobacco products. So I will stop here and let my co-sponsor do that, and we also do have, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my expert witnesses that we do have is Andrew Vallejos, who is the director of the Regulation and Licensing Alcoholic Beverage Control area that we have, and also Dr. Michael Landon, who is the state epidemiologist from the Department of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate the opportunity to be here today with Senate Bill 131 and my co-sponsor, Senator Linda Lopez. The e-cigarette and e-liquid industry is currently unregulated in New Mexico. As a parent and co-chair of the Tobacco Settlement Interim Committee, I strongly believe it is imperative to protect the health of our children, protect the public health of New Mexicans, eliminate bad actors and underground products. I've worked in this critical piece of legislation for 2 years. Over the past year, we have met with Governor Lujan Grisham's office, the New Mexico Department of Health, and New Mexico Regulation and Licensing Department to discuss the depth of the regulation framework. It is an honor to co-sponsor again with Senator Lopez and work with the governor to pass the country's first comprehensive act to regulate e-cigarette products. We can promote greater public health through smart regulation and responsible public policies. All legal vapor products currently being sold have been FDA registered and FDA regulated since 2016. No new legal vapor products have entered the market since then. There are already strict FDA warning labels requirements in place for all nicotine-containing e-cigarette products. Senate Bill 131 also contains marketing restrictions and labeling requirements. These are critical for protecting our youth. Creating a licensing requirement will go a long way to regulate the vaping industry in New Mexico. Last year, the state established a tax on products, but without a licensing requirement, there is no clear tax base, and collecting the tax is difficult to enforce. Thank you very much, Mr. President, Mr. Chairman. Sorry about that. That's how much I respect you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you very much. Sorry for the distraction. All right, members of the audience, is there anyone here in support? Show of hands, please, and then opposition. Okay, so we're going to hear about 15 minutes of testimony at most from both sides. There's quite a bit more, looks like support. Did I see that again? Did I see that right? Support? And yeah, it's quite a bit more support. In opposition, I saw just a couple of hands, right? So, so we'll hear from the supporters first. We'll start on the right side of the audience. Front row to back, please. No more than a minute. There's a number of you.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Suzanne Skasik. I'm a captain with New Mexico State Police, and we support this proposed legislation. We recognize the need for some regulation and accountability in this industry for our communities as a whole and for youth in particular.
Thank you. Is it Captain? All right.
Yes, sir.
Captain. Yes.
Good evening, Chair, members of the committee. My name is Ariane Showers. I'm the Policy Director at the Department of Health. And we worked really tirelessly on this bill alongside all of the shared stakeholders and different departments that are going to be charged with implementing this new licensing structure. And we're really pleased with the end result, and we are in strong support of this bill.
Other support.
Chair of the committee, and my name is Kathy Cruciata, and I'm a registered lobbyist for the Vapor Technology Association. We also stand in support of this legislation and commend sponsors for bringing this forward. And as everyone stated, we all work together to bring this legislation forward. Just to note, cigarettes and nicotine users have been regulated by the state since 2015 or added into the Tobacco Act. And the Tobacco Act has introduced state licensing language since then, and those products have been regulated as that regulatory framework. We're happy to see a licensing.
Sounds like it. There's no opposition in the room. So. The marketers will be obviously knows it.
Thank you very much. Anyone else on that same row? Next row back.
Petroleum marketers. On this bill?
Chairman, members of the committee, Karen Woodlock with the National Association of Social Workers, New Mexico chapter, and we stand in support of this bill. We appreciate them trying to get a handle on the industry, and particularly with the level of underage vaping. And so we do anything to control that if at all possible.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Jaramillo.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, David Jaramillo, registered lobbyist for the city of Albuquerque, and for the same reasons that we stood in support of this bill in Senate Public Affairs, we continue to support the bill. There is a wrinkle to this bill, however, and the lobbyists for the vaping industry are hinted at it. In Senate Public Affairs, there was an attempt to amend this bill to put full preemption on it. That failed by a vote of 5-1. Today, in the House version was amended over objection of some of the folks supporting the bill to add full preemption. And so the city of Albuquerque's support for this bill is based upon the unamended bill that preserves local authority over the breadth of its ordinances for time, place, and manner of the sale and advertisement of these products. So I don't know whether that amendment is going to be offered here, but since it was offered this morning, and I think there will be others that will speak in favor of the concept, the city of Albuquerque doesn't have an interest in doing what Mr. Vallejos does in the overall regulation and license. The city of Albuquerque does have an interest in preserving its home rule prerogatives with respect to time, place, and manner ordinances. And so for those reasons, we support the bill in its unamended form.
Your support, yes. Anyone else? Yes.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, my name is Michael Kelly. I'm with the Department of Health through a campaign called No Minor Sale, and I'm the campaign manager of this campaign. 89% of adult tobacco users began using tobacco products before the age of 18. The reason I bring this up, 1 in 4 New Mexico youth used e-cigarettes in the last 30 days in 2017 and 2015. This data, it's actually higher than the national average, which means we obviously know that e-cigarettes are very dangerous given the nicotine content in them, and that e-cigarette users as youth are 4 times more likely to smoke combustible cigarettes. As such, with the No Minor Sale campaign, I've been across the state over the last 7 months. The campaign has been active for 2.5 years, collecting community support across the state. We've been to 80 events or presentations across the state, collected over 4,000 surveys, speaking to the need to address this issue. A lot of constituents, a lot of New Mexicans don't know the issue of electronic cigarettes. They need to know more, and they really want tobacco retail licensing. We've collected over 6,500 messages of support, which are handwritten, that discuss the need for tobacco retail licensing and local control. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in support? That side of the room? Other side of the room? Yes. Support.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I'm Dr. Neil Bowen. I'm the Director of the Behavioral Services Division in HSD and standing in support of this law, of course. I want to point out a couple of items having to do with the law that will reinforce our ability to maximize our prevention activities through BHSD. We've been the sole source for many, many years of any list of tobacco sellers in the state. So having regulation will allow us to repurpose a lot of resources to more prevention activities. This will also reinforce our ability to provide effective education to tobacco sellers about appropriate sales activities. So we are in strong support.
Thank you. Other support? Yes.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Mahesh Sita with the American Heart Association, and we thank the sponsors to bring this bill. And you know, we stand in strong support of this bill, especially the repeal of preemption. We're not the only state that has a repeal of preemption in this case. 17 other states have. Our neighbors, Colorado, Arizona, and Texas have repealed preemption. So we strongly urge to keep that repeal of preemption, because it's important to give local communities the access or pass ordinances that can have effect within their communities to control the epidemic of vaping. So we strongly support this bill with the repeal of the preemption. Thank you.
Thank you. Other support? Yes.
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. My name is Charlie Berkeley. I'm actually here in support for aging and long-term services, and we're in support of this legislation. We believe that further licensing and regulation for the department is a good thing, so we're in support. Thanks.
Thank you. Did I miss anyone in support? All right, opposition. Show us your hands again. Opposition. Thank you guys. All right, yes.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Matthew Monty. As written, I oppose this bill simply because it would put us out of business. However, we have been working with the authors, and we were guaranteed certain amendments, and so we're looking forward to receiving
Clarification, you all have amendments?
There is an amendment, Mr. Chairman, yes.
Yeah, that's in front of us too. I see that. We haven't moved that for admission yet, but, all right, we'll get to that in a second. Others, opposition?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Ruben Baca. I am the State Executive Director of the Mexican Petroleum Marketers Association, and I am a contract lobbyist for the Grocers Association. I stand in opposition to a part of this bill is the preemption. The preemption is extremely important to us. I deal an awful lot with the Liquor Control Act. I deal a lot with liquor, and it works like a once the state has control of the license, it should be in control of the license and dictate what can happen and what the laws are. I can't have 43 counties having different laws all across New Mexico. It doesn't work, just a hodgepodge. It'll turn into a nightmare. Thank you.
Thank you. Other opposition? Senator, you had an amendment. You want to move that?
I so move amendment number 1, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, to Senate Bill 131.
Explain the amendment, please.
And if I could, Mr. Chairman, allow my expert witness to explain.
It was passed
Should
out.
have it.
It's in that pile of
Passed
stuff
out.
they gave you.
371.2?
It is, yes, 371.2.
Yes. Does everyone have it?
I know. It's there.
Anyone not have it?
Senator Martinez.
Senator Lopez, on the amendment, please.
Please.
Mr. Chair. Okay. Mr. Chair, I first want to say that these amendments were a product of an open-mindedness about the bill from the sponsors and from the governor's office to listen both to the health advocates and to the industry itself. And they'll be self-explanatory through it. But I think we really improved the bill through some of these amendments. So let me just take them seriatim. The first one that you're going to see on number 1, and we'll get to it, is as originally written, it criminalized a misdemeanor for a person who sells tobacco products to a minor. We took out any criminalization of the minor, but there was still the concern that we were criminalizing the clerk instead of the establishment, and we didn't want to criminalize the clerk because a lot of times they're minimum wage workers, and so we redefined in the criminal statute, in the criminal section, person, and added retailer, and then we redefined retailer to only include the person who operates the establishment, not the clerk. And if you wanted to ask questions or sorry, okay. The other significant part was as originally written, we had licensing fees up to $1,000 per location. That was a concern for some of the industry folks who have multiple licenses. We worked on a compromise to have a bifurcated system where we have a relatively high application fee, $850, but it came down from $1,000, and a renewal fee down from $1,000 up to $500. So it was $1,000, and now it's $850 and $500. Some of these other technical ones are there is an amendment here to make sure that all the language collected from the act would go into the Tobacco Products Fund. We also had an amendment that allowed clerks to accept a tribal ID as well as a state or federal ID. Importantly, and this is one of the amendments that we're working on with the cigar shops, was as originally written, it would be illegal to have a self-service of tobacco. And in the bill, we had one exception, which was primarily for VFWs, especially in clubs where minors are not allowed. You would be allowed to have a vending machine.
with the cigar stores came and talked to us, and Bar Barbaroos, of course, represented the cigar industry. They said, as a business practice, cigars, typically you walk into a humidor to pick out individual cigars, and so we just added that language in as an amendment so that would be an exception to the self-vending prohibition. Let's see. Yeah, and then the last part, the 14 through 18 basically changes the effective date. So it would be effective if passed July 1. This would be housed at Alcoholic Beverage Control, and we'd need some time to promulgate rules. There's timelines for that, posting requirements and all that. So the effective date would be January 1 of 2021 before we would start issuing licenses on or before then. That pretty much sums it up, Mr. Chair.
Chairman, I'm just curious what the fees are for. I guess it's going so fast. Are these new created fees, or are they old fees that were already in legislation and that were just following the what are the fees for?
Mr. Chair, Senator, the fees are there to, okay, so let me back up for your previous question. What did we have before? So what we had before was tobacco regulation was kind of in criminal statutes that were but they didn't have any regulatory environment, and there was no collection of fees. Now, Tax and Rev has a very light licensure system to collect taxes at the distributor and manufacturer level, but not at the retail level. So this would create a licensing scheme for all three tiers: manufacturers, distributors, and retailers. And pretty much the fees would fund the program and the licensing program and enforcement efforts as well. It would be a non-reverting fund.
So they're new. It's a new tax, actually.
Correct.
So it's and it originally started at 1,000.
Mr. Chair, Senator, yes, it was up to 1,000.
It's 850 and 500.
Mr. Chair, Senator, correct.
You guys don't think those are a little you don't think those fees are a little high for it's for the distributor, right? Apparently not. If you wanted 1,000.
Mr. Chair, Senator, it's a really good question, and there was a very good debate in tax about that as well. On one hand, you have this is a dangerous product, and we don't necessarily, we don't want everybody just to be able to just do it, right? So there has to be sort of an entry fee for the entry, and the sort of to recompense for the social cost of tobacco, and so. That's why the initial application fee is a little bit higher. But then once you're in the fee structure, the renewal is slightly lower because if you're a good corporate citizen, we can kind of give you a break on that end. So that was sort of the thinking in the fees there is a deterrent effect. You just don't want everybody just to do it because there has to be some, as we say in the liquor industry, some skin in the game, right? That license has to mean something to you if you're going to enforce the T21.
Mr. Chairman, I quit smoking probably 10 years ago. But I did. Actually, when they went up to about $8 or $9, I figured I'm not going to pay $8 or $9 to kill myself. So I decided, and I just went cold turkey, and it worked. I mean, I didn't have an issue with it. But I'm just wondering that. So these fees are on a yearly basis to continue to sell their products, but they're not fines. In other words, even if you're a good actor and you play by the rules, you still have to pay these fees every year.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, yes, it's similar to alcohol. I mean, if cannabis were to do it in this regulatory structure, typically there is an application fee and a fee. These are significantly lower than alcohol, for sure.
Mr. Chairman, is this for vape or for actual products?
Mr. Chair, Senator, for both.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Who's on the amendment? Senator Morse.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the amendment, a couple things. So the amendment removes any criminal penalties for the server of tobacco, but not the real retailer. What is the penalty in here for the retailer if you adopt this?
Mr. Chair, Senator Morse, it kind of looks like alcohol regulation, because in alcohol, the main administrative penalty if you sell to minors is an administrative penalty. So the administrative penalty would still apply here, but in certain instances, selling liquor to a minor is a fourth degree well, I shouldn't say this.
Mr. Chair, Senator, I think it is a fourth degree felony
Yeah.
if you get caught, right?
Correct.
Selling to a minor.
And so what SIU will do, and the captain does, is that sometimes they will hit them with the administrative fine and a non-traffic citation, to go to court.
So, Mr. Chair, Senators, so the person who's actually doing the selling is going to be a clerk at a convenience store, for example. The owner isn't anywhere close. And so you're going to hit, what is the penalty on this misdemeanor? What kind of class of misdemeanor is this, Mr. Chair?
Mr. Chair, Senator Morris, it's a full misdemeanor.
So you're up to 18 months in jail.
I think,
or a year in jail, I'm sorry.
Less than 1 year, yeah.
Yeah, so 364 days in jail. When the owner's not there, but the person selling the tobacco to the kid who's doing it isn't going to face crime, the owner who might be out of state somewhere else is going to face a year in jail when they're not in the building when the transaction happens. Am I understanding that correct?
Mr. Chair, Senator, potentially. This is really more of a deterrent. This is really just to reinforce the fact that you can't hide behind the clerks, right? You can't say the clerk did it.
Chair, Senators, there is no deterrent for the clerk who's actually selling it. You're taking that away. There's no deterrent for that person who makes a decision at 2 o'clock in the morning to sell a pack of cigarettes to a 15-year-old kid. There's no deterrent in this, but you're going to go criminally and put an owner of the business in jail for a year.
Mr. Chair, Senator, I think in practice, I don't think...
Mr. Chair, in practice, great. This is what you're asking us to vote on. In practice, I mean, this is what you're asking us to vote on here.
I'm happy to answer any questions.
So that's the question, is that you're going to throw an owner in jail for a year, but not the clerk who sells it.
Mr. Chair, I think I would disagree with the language. I think that they face a possible misdemeanor penalty in magistrate court or in metro court. I think in practice, I don't think anybody's been thrown in jail for a year on a misdemeanor of selling to minors.
Chair, we've seen the opposite in this building when we pass law. So it's up to a year in jail per packet. So a clerk sells a couple packs to a couple kids, and then the owner is looking at a couple years in jail and had anything to do with that transaction. Ouch. Mr. Chair, so the $500 renewal fee, $850 fee, I'm thinking of I don't know how many stores, like say an Allsup's has. I think it's about 400. 130, so $70,000 a year fee just for the renewal every year. Wow, $100,000 to get going. And you said this was supposed to go to the social impact of tobacco. Where is this money actually being spent? Is it being Mr. Chair, is it staying in R&D, RLD, or is it actually going to cancer research or medical funds or anything else? Where's this money going?
Mr. Chair, Senator Morris, this is a regulatory, the first step of regulating tobacco. So this would add New Mexico to the 40th state that regulates retail tobacco. So the main purpose of this bill is to set up a regulatory environment. And so most of the money that would be collected would be for regulatory efforts.
So, Mr. Chair, so Senator. So it's not to combat the negative social impact and healthcare of tobacco. It's for the regulatory services.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Morris, we have secession programs and we have Department of Health and we have a HSD with SINAR programs that are on the grounds fighting underage tobacco. This is just another weapon in that struggle.
Well, Mr. Chair, expert witness, it's not going to cessation. They're paying a couple $100,000 a year for regulatory oversight, not cessation. So I just thank you for your answer. The IDs, the tribal IDs you mentioned, tell me that process. I'm not familiar with the tribal IDs. Do they have age verification? I just don't know what that process is. Are they real IDs? How are tribal IDs? Are we able to, Mr. Chair, are you able to use a tribal ID to buy alcohol in the state of New Mexico? Maybe I'll ask the SID over here.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I am not sure what the practice is as far as what the clerks accept, as far as the government issued ID with the photo and the date of birth. And so a lot of times as a practice, they adopt their own rules or things that they implement in the stores.
So, Mr. Chair, Captain, do clerks accept tribal IDs for purchase of alcohol?
It is not standard to, when we work our operations, we do not allow the minors to present anything other than their state of New Mexico government issued ID.
So, Mr. Chair, what's the purpose and then of putting this amendment in?
I believe that the purpose of this is to just allow to be more inclusive, Senator and Mr. Chair, to allow that opportunity for the federal government to not be exclusionary.
But, Mr. Chair, Captain, we're not going to let them be inclusive and buy alcohol.
Unfortunately, sir, Senator, Mr. Chair, I can't speak specifically to that or how the statutory language is written.
Okay, that was on the amendment, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, just one. Walk me through, where's the penalty on the owner? Walk me through where that is.
Mr. Chair, Senator Avi Soto, there's two different criminal penalties. So if you look on page 17, section 19 and section 20. So you have section 19 is the criminal penalties to the establishment. Section 20 is criminal penalties for unlicensed activities. So on the criminal penalties, I'll just walk you through it. In addition to any other administrative penalties that may be imposed by the division, a person who violates Section 3 or Section, I think that got amended, Section 18, I believe, of the Tobacco Products Act is guilty of a misdemeanor shall be sentenced to the provisions. Each violation is a separate and distinct offense. So to do that, you go back to the definition in the amendment. We took out the word on page.
Amendment number, which one?
Oh, sorry. So on the bill, so page 17, line 8, it says a person who violates Section 3. So we changed that. So on the amendment.
Got it. Amendment number 14.
There you go.
We changed it to a retailer.
Yes, so we changed it to retailer, and then we changed the definition of retailer to include not that retailer does not mean the non-management employees of an owner or operator of a tobacco retail establishment.
And that's amendment number 1.
Correct.
I see. Okay. Yeah, so, Mr. Chairman, at this time, I would move to strike numbers 1 and 14 of the amendment, of the proposed amendment. Numbers 1 and 14.
So explain your basis for that, and then we'll let the sponsor weigh in on that. Senator.
Yeah, so I find it problematic to say we're going to put a misdemeanor that carries jail time, but we don't expect anybody to get jail time. I just think that's a problem. And so, I mean, if you had structured this where they wouldn't be sentenced pursuant to the provisions of 31-19-1, if you'd done a special, if you'd done a fine or something else, or it didn't involve jail time, certainly I understand where you're coming from, but you're creating a misdemeanor here, and you're putting that misdemeanor on somebody who may not have been on site. I think that creates a real mens rea problem. You have significant due process issues as it relates to the misdemeanor. You have a non-actor being charged with the crime, and subject to going to jail. And when asked about it, your response was, "Yeah, but they're not really going to go to jail." So I vote to strike.
Mr. Chair, Senator, was just a point of clarification. Are you wanting to strike the amendment because that would create the criminal liability for the clerk and the owner and all that, or are you wanting to strike that section of the statute?
Mr. Chairman, so we have a proposed amendment that has numbers 1 through 18 on them, and I'm proposing to strike numbers 1 and 14 of the proposed amendment.
A point of clarification, would that, I know you guys have great legal minds up here, that would essentially keep the criminal penalties in the section for everybody, for the clerk, for any, and the owner and everybody. If you have a problem with the criminalization and the criminal penalties, I would think that you would want to not adopt the amendment, but then strike section 19 on page 17.
No, and I appreciate that suggestion. We may get to that later.
So first of all, Senator Avisoto, you're proposing a motion. You may not have been here. Senator Lopez has already moved the amendment.
Right.
So that's the motion that's before us right now.
Right.
You're suggesting an amendment to her a motion.
Correct.
But her motion is still the precedent motion. So.
No, actually, an amendment to the amendment takes precedence.
Well, let me hear the sponsor see whether she wants to accept that as an amendment or not.
Well, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate, part of the discussion as we've been moving this bill through, sorry, let me use this. Part of the discussion we've been having is we've been negotiating back and forth since the bill was first thought of to be brought forward this session. There was comments that were made in a previous committee about what we could do to structure who gets the penalty, and what the concern has been, Mr. Chairman, Senator, is that we don't want to penalize the clerk, similar to a conversation that we've had when we were dealing with the liquor issue that's been in front of our committee before, and trying to figure out what we could do to make sure that we're not going to penalize the clerk that's there in front. I know we'd had a discussion too about doing maybe a structured process where the clerk would be able to get maybe I call it a type of a reprimand, citation of some sort, so at least they understand the severity of what the action they've taken. But that, of course, it still needs to go ranked up, Mr. Chairman, Senator, as to how the responsibility is still on the retailer to train and making sure that their employees are doing their job. So I think what we were trying to do is to figure out, but there was, we met some resistance, quite frankly, about trying to structure, I think, what the intent had been. So we are here in front of you at this point in time. My intent, Mr. Chairman, Senators, I really don't want to criminalize, tag, whatever you wish to call the clerk, just to making sure, because those persons, as we know, we've had this discussion many a time, is making minimum wage, and the retailer needs to own the responsibility of training and making sure those persons are trained appropriately. So that's part of where we've come up to this point with the amendment that you have in front. So at this point in time, Mr. Chairman, I will say it's an unfriendly amendment to the amendment.
Senator Avisoto, you still have the floor then. I want to recognize her for her position. Are you done?
Yeah, no, I mean, I just, like I said, I think it's problematic to say it's a misdemeanor for someone who wasn't present, may not have known about it, didn't have any knowledge it was taking place, didn't have any control about it because they weren't even there. And, oh, by the way, we don't think a judge is going to exercise a judge's prerogative. I mean, if this had been structured in a different way in terms of the sentencing, I might feel differently. But the sentencing includes a year of jail time.
So just to be clear, are we on the amendment to the amendment here?
Yeah.
So I guess my concern, though, from Randy Soto, is that the definition of person that we go back to now includes the same individual corporation. So in other words, it doesn't solve the problem you're seeking to solve yet. I realize you maybe have another motion, because again, the person is the individual corporation, firm, partnership, co-partnership, so they're all now being hooked in under your proposed amendment. We're back to the original bill, and I think they were trying to correct that. And I just think there's a bigger question of whether a misdemeanor is appropriate. Maybe a petty misdemeanor is another option we could put in there. I was thinking about that's a 90-day jail sentence.
It's 180 days.
180 days. Okay, so that's
Still a jail sentence.
It is. No, it is. So I think I tend to agree with where you're going, but I just think taking out this actually broadens the folks that are being hooked on this, because this now has all the individuals and all the corporations. So
well, I mean,
just want to point that
right,
out.
but I would also point out to Senator Worth, Mr. Chairman, that retailer starts off with any person. So it actually, right, so if you start off with any person, which means an individual, corporation, firm, partnership, co-partnership, association, other legal entity, plus a partnership, joint venture, society, club, trustee, trust, association, organization, or corporation that owns or operates. So actually, this is much broader.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, actually read the last sentence, though, of the amendment for Q, because that's where they're narrowing
Sure.
it.
No, I understand
so
that.
Again,
I understand that. And
I think we could. I just think your amendment's actually broadening the folks that are subject to the at this. And I get it. It's the first potential amendment here,
Right.
but I just thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I may,
Senator Lopez?
if you wish to get rid of Section 19, just get rid of it. Thank you.
So Senator Ivy Soto, the sponsors got that proposal. Does that get us ultimately to where you're going anyway?
well, so Mr. Chairman, so I guess the question that I would ask is, where else is the word retailer used in this, where the definition and the amendment would make a difference versus the definition on page 5?
Mr. Chairman, if you look through the language in the bill, it's listed very many places.
Correct, but Mr. Chairman and Senator Lopez, it's listed very many places specifically with intending that or with contemplating the definition on page 5, beginning line 5. Right? So in other words, if we're going to ultimately strike Section 19, I'm concerned that we're amending in the amendment, we're amending the definition of retailer outside of the definition that already exists, and then it applies to the use of retailer in places in a manner that was not intended.
Mr. Chair, Senator Ivy Soto, one of the purposes of this bill is to license retailers, and so we have the definition of retailer as a license type, and so it's throughout there. I think if your concern was about sort of the definition at the very end of the definition in the amendment about retailer does not include a non-employee, I don't think that would have an effect on the bill.
Okay, and then Mr. Chairman and Senators and Andy, so is there a preference for the rest of this definition of retailer in the amendment as to the rest of the bill versus the definition of retailer that exists already on page 5, line 5? outside of section 19.
Clarifying question.
So Senator Avisoto still has the floor, but if you'll yield to Senator Stewart for a question on your question.
Always happy to yield to Senator Stewart.
So this is all new material. Am I right about that? This is all new material, so we don't have current definition of retailer anywhere else.
Correct, Mr. Chairman and Senator Stewart. So on page 5, line 5, under the new material, you have a proposed definition of retailer. And then you have retailer that is used throughout the bill. Here we have a different definition of retailer that we were told was done in contemplation of the amendment 14 that amends section 19 of the bill. And so that's why I'm asking whether the distinct definition of retailer is a preferred definition with regard to the rest of the bill outside of section 19 or not.
Mr. Chair, Senator Ivy Soto, I think certainly just on plain reading on the amendment, it's more inclusive, but in my reading, there is no difference in the net effect between the definition of retailer in the amendment and the definition of retailer in the original bill.
Okay. So then,
so there really is not a preference. I guess if you ask me personally, I always believe in Occam's razor. I believe if you can say it shorter and more elegantly, I would go with that instead of the entire list of every entity that council service put in there.
okay. Well, I mean, right, my mind was correct. Yeah. So I was sticking with it.
So paragraphs 1 and 14.
Correct.
Proposed to be struck from the amendment. Senator Lopez, you clear what we're doing?
Yes,
Mr. Vallejos?
I am clear.
All right. Everybody clear? Is there objection to adoption of the amendment striking paragraphs 1 and 14? And otherwise adopting the amendment? Is that the cleanest way to do this? I think so.
Certainly, if there's no member to take an objection to take that out, I would certainly move. I'll be happy to move paragraphs 2 through 13 and 15 through 18 of the amendment. Yes, it's the same place.
Yeah, same idea.
Yeah.
Senator Lopez? All right, understood. Any other questions? Clarifications?
That delete paragraph 19. Oh,
right.
That's another one.
Right.
That's another
Yeah,
one.
section 19 is not before us yet. It will be.
Right. All right, on the motion, Emily, you clear?
Yes.
All right. Is there objection to adoption of the amendment to Senate Bill 131?
As amended.
As amended, yeah, effectively.
As
Right.
amended.
we vote on the amendment to the amendment?
That's what this vote is right now.
Oh, okay.
I'm looking for any objection to the amendment as amended. Amended, all right? All right, seeing none, the amendment's adopted, with the exception of paragraphs 1 and 14.
Except 1 and 14. All right.
Senator Ivy Soto, you still have the floor.
Oh, okay. Have we? Well, in that case, Mr. Chairman, if still mine for the moment, then I would move that we strike section 19 of the bill on page 17.
Second.
Section 19 of the bill on page 17.
There's a second by Senator Morris. Discussion.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
So I think
Senator
we do
Wood.
need to fix the title, because now it's, do we have that in the title, the penalties?
Still other penalties.
Yeah, there's still penalties.
And then renumber?
Yeah.
Mr. Chair.
You said.
So we were looking at page 1, line 19?
Correct.
Yep.
Strike and criminal penalties.
But there's still a criminal penalty.
Oh, there is?
And criminal penalty.
Okay.
Section 20.
So we're taking out the
Just change penalties to penalty.
I'm not sure they.
It says penalties in
Sure.
section 20 anyways.
Well, let's find out.
Madam Chair, so I guess if there's administrative penalties, I think
Correct.
it probably it's fine.
Yeah, so the title's fine. So just be strike section 19, renumber accordingly.
Senator Lopez.
Mr. Chairman, I propose that one, so thank you.
Okay. Consider to be a favorable amendment. Other discussion, striking section 19? Is there objection to a striking section 19? Seeing none, that amendment is made as well. Still with me, Emily?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Senator Abisoto, you still have the floor.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'll be happy to yield to anybody else for a while and then come back to me when.
Going to catch your breath, get your second one? No, you may not get that chance. Senator Morris.
We're here for the night.
Senator, since we're talking about penalties, I want to start the conversation on section 20. What kind of concerned me is the way I see that, Senators, is the situation that happened in New York where we had an unfortunate situation when some kids or some guy was selling independent cigarettes on the street. It was a misdemeanor in New York, ended up getting arrested, chokehold, and died. And I think Senator Ward brought up the point earlier about misdemeanors and petty misdemeanors. Is that, Mr. Chair, Senators, is that the situation you're talking about in section 20? Someone selling cigarettes on the side of the street and things like that, like happened in New York where that gentleman was chokehold and killed? Is that what we're talking about in this situation?
Mr. Chair, Senator Morris, no, this is not about that specific situation, but just generally in licensing statutes, it's always the problem of getting an unlicensed activity. And so the purpose of this bill is to try to get as many people licensed as possible. And so our efforts are going to be redoubled in that area. But in certain situations, if somebody is just not complying by the rules, we want to go out there and stop it with unlicensed activity. And that's typically done by criminal statute instead of administrative penalty.
Section 20, and I was trying to figure out a person who manufactures, distributes, or sells tobacco products without a license required pursuant to blah, 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 is guilty of a misdemeanor. And I immediately thought of that situation in New York that we all know about. That's what he was doing. He was selling individual cigarettes on the side of the street in Staten Island. Cops came up to him, created a he resisted arrest, ended up getting chokehold and killed. So that would fit under this section 20. We're making this a misdemeanor up to a year in jail for selling individual cigarettes on the side of the street. So I think Senator Ward brought up, should this be a petty misdemeanor or a different crime? Up to a year in jail for selling a cigarette on the side of the street seems pretty steep to me, Mr. Chair. Senators. Because that's a justification to use New York to go after this guy.
Well, Mr. Chairman, Senator, there's also, those who do go and purchase the cigarettes who are of legal age and then go back and sell it to the young people. They do it with liquor at this point in time. You see it sometimes when you go to the gas stations. You'll have somebody who goes in and purchases the liquor because the person's underage, and they just go around the corner, and I've seen them exchange money. The kid walks off with the booze, and the other adult has their cash in hand. And I think, Mr. Chairman, that was part of what we were trying to make sure that doesn't happen, is that you have an adult who goes in, purchases it, comes back out, and it's there. You can see the exchange of money, and that the young person will get it who's under the age of 21. So I think that was part of the impetus of what we're trying to address with this at this point, not specifically the issue which did happen, and we saw what happened with that incident. But I think this is where we are looking as to what we can do specifically for those of us adults who go purchase and do that. It happens, Mr. Chairman, Senator.
Thank you, Senator. The conversation I wanted to start was just that, if that's an appropriate penalty or not. So thank you for your answer. And the second part of that section that caught my attention was, Mr. Chair, Senators, a couple years ago, I remember that one of the first bills I carried had to deal with forfeiture. And halfway through the committee meeting, Senator Ivy Soto was grilling me, and I realized it was a terrible law. You know, and I was ready to vote against that too. 2 years later, we had a great bill, a bipartisan bill to actually end forfeiture. Like if you remember that, Senator Ivy Soto. So I'm a little concerned about that last section after going through what I did on that bill, and what we later did as a legislature with that seizure and forfeiture in line 18 through 22, which goes against the policy we said it was generated in the House of Representatives. The DWI issue. I'm sorry, page 17, Senator Ivy Soto, section 20, line 18 through 22 seems to fall under the forfeiture issue that we talked about in the past and other issues, senators. So those are my two comments about that particular section that concern me on the penalties and the forfeiture that I'd like our legal experts to take a look at. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So let's try to take those a little bit in order. On page 17, the lines 18 through 22, those two sentences. That's what you were referring to?
Well, first, yes, Mr. Chairman, 17, the misdemeanor situation, about the appropriateness of that penalty per Senator Ward's comments earlier, and then the example I used, the real-world example I used, and then the second issue was line 18 through 22 about the forfeiture issue, which kind of goes against Senator Ivy Soto's and Senator Tarocco's bill a couple years ago.
So let's take that last one, if we can, please, on lines 18 through 22. You're referring to that as a forfeiture. I guess that's one way to think about it.
That's exactly how I read it as a layperson when I read that.
Yeah. I'm not really sure whether that's what that is or not. That may be what it's intended to do, but it's also seemed to be a directive on retaining evidence.
It seems to be retaining evidence. It doesn't say anything about upon conviction. It just says it's going to be retained and destroyed. No conviction necessary. So that got my attention.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, my expert witness may wish to add.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, Senator, so it's my understanding, and you guys deal more with criminal law than I ever do, but it's my understanding that forfeiture is when you're trying to seize assets of a personal nature, and you want the due process protections, but you're trying to seize the thing. In this case, this is contraband material. It's sort of similar to alcohol, similar to what the cannabis bill had as well. There is no property interest generally. This is the way I learned it in law school. There is no property interest in illegal products. And so if you are selling illegal cigarettes or illegal drugs, it's not a forfeiture. You don't have to petition the court to get that stuff back and have due process. That is seized, and typically it's seized for evidence if you have a criminal conviction, but then destroyed afterwards. We just wanted to have a quick method. We wanted to define it as contraband product. So this would not be, for example, to give an illustration, if we were doing an administrative penalty for somebody who sold a pack of cigarettes to a minor, that would not be subject to forfeiture, and that wouldn't be contraband. That would just be evidence. That could be typically, we wouldn't destroy that necessarily. But if you were an unlicensed person, like you were saying, like somebody brought a couple of cartons of cigarettes and they parked outside of a junior high and were selling it, for the purposes of obtaining a conviction, we'll keep that in evidence. But other than that, it will be destroyed because it's contraband product.
So, Mr. Chair and defense attorneys on the committee, it doesn't say that upon adjudication will be returned, it's found innocent will be returned. And I'm not a smoker, never have been, but don't these things have a shelf life? And if something goes on adjudicated through the courts, don't they go stale and they're bad? The government's holding these things, so they're worthless at the end of the time, and they're found innocent, but the property's been held. Could be a couple $1,000s worth of property's been held, and it's gone bad, and there's no recourse for them.
Well, maybe given some.
Cigarettes go bad, correct? Do they?
Yeah.
Anyone know?
Yes. Yeah, they do. Mr. Chair, Senator, so so for example, with SIU in public safety, when they do minor compliance operations, they typically give the person, the person who's going to go in there and attempt to buy, they will give them a certain amount of money, and they'll say, go in there and buy in this case, a pack of cigarettes. If they sell them the pack of cigarettes, that's really in the control of public safety. And so they'll just keep it for evidence purposes. What this is really getting at is, again, the example I gave of the person, the unscrupulous person who decides to go sell to minors outside of a junior high or something like that and has an unlicensed tobacco selling a business. Then for the purposes of obtaining a conviction, great, we keep it. But other than that, for example, if we didn't prosecute him for some reason, we would be able to destroy that as contraband evidence so that it didn't fill up. The concern is we don't want to keep it in evidence lockers forever. That's what one of the problems we're seeing around the state is we have evidence lockers that are just filled with stuff that's never going to be destroyed. I would think that if the person, sorry, Mr. Chair, Senator, I would believe that the person, if for example, if it was unlicensed activity and let's say Bernalillo County Sheriff's Office or SIU brought a criminal charge and that took them to magistrate court or metro court and they were found innocent and actually justified it, or maybe they had a license or something, then I think that if otherwise they would have a legal right to that product and it would be returned to them in that situation. I don't think that they would be able to keep that product if a judge that they were innocent.
And I guess that's my question, is it says it shall be destroyed, Mr. Chair, and not going to be a year later and the product's not bad. So I don't know, I'll lose my legal consultants over there, but that just seems, your property's being taken away and there's being destroyed, and you're found innocent, you have no recourse. I think that's a thing we learned in the state with the forfeiture issue, so I want to throw that out there for conversation.
Is that it? All right, we're back, so we're gonna do some more surgery So who's up? Teed up. Is it
Sure.
Worth or Senator Ravi Soto?
Well, sure. Let me just, if I may, just pick up where Senator Moore's left off. So Ms. Reyes, I'm a little confused by the example that you gave. Could you, Mr. Chairman, Senators, Ms. Reyes, run through the example of somebody selling in front of a middle school?
Mr. Chair, Senator, and forgive me, I'm not a criminal defense attorney. We're just trying to regulate this, but I understand the question. So the example I gave was for unlicensed activity. So in this case, it would be a criminal violation for a person under Section 20 who manufactures, distributes, or sells tobacco products without a license. So if, say, for example, unscrupulous Uncle Charlie goes out and buys a carton of cigarettes and he decides to sell those outside of a junior high, he's in violation of this statute and he could be charged with a misdemeanor.
Certainly, and Mr. Chairman, Senators, and Mr. Reyes, I understand that part. But then what I was unclear about was how that applied to the forfeiture.
If there was, and so it'd be a contraband. So so the example would be that if for the purposes of a criminal conviction, let's say, they keep that tobacco product as evidence of the crime, and then let's say he's adjudged to be innocent or not guilty, I should say, then there is no criminal penalty. I think it's an open question about whether that gets returned to him or if it's destroyed. I think that would probably be up to a judge to determine at that point. But from our eyes, it would be a contraband product because, again, they are attempting to sell product without a license.
Sure, and Mr. Chairman and Mr. Reyes, I understand that. First of all, when you say it would be up to a judge, under this, it wouldn't be up to a judge. Because you say contraband tobacco products no longer needed as evidence shall be destroyed. But the problem that you have with that is that, exactly with that example, is that those cigarettes are in fact a legal product to be possessed. They're not a legal product to be possessed by the middle schoolers, but Uncle Charlie, assuming Uncle Charlie is over 21 years of age, it is a legal product for Uncle Charlie to possess.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, that is correct, and we actually wrestled with a similar question in another committee about that. What if a minor sells to a minor? So the minor doesn't have a property interest in legally obtaining tobacco products. Let's say it's a vaping product, and they're selling vaping products in junior high. Does the minor have a right under T21 to obtain that legally, or is that contraband? And what do you do with it? Do you keep it in an evidence locker forever, or at some point do you destroy it?
Right, and I guess the point that I'm making, though, is that we're not talking, in this example of another minor, we're talking about Uncle Charlie, who for purposes of our discussion is over the age of 21, and that is, in fact, a legal product for Uncle Charlie to possess. So, Mr. Chairman, what I'd like to suggest is that we amend on page 17, starting at line 20, after the word retained, excuse me, we strike the rest of the line after the word retained. Line 21, we strike the whole line. Line 22, we strike the whole line. And before the period, we insert and disposed of pursuant to the Forfeiture Act. Because the Forfeiture Act actually deals with all of the subtleties of what you do with product that is illegal in all situations, or product that is illegal in some situations.
Yeah. Mr. Chair, Senator, we accept that as a friendly amendment.
Okay, thank you.
We still get the same intent.
One more time.
Sure.
One more time for
Certainly. Page 17, begin on line 20. After the word retained, strike to the just before the period on line 22. And insert in lieu thereof and disposed of pursuant to the Forfeiture Act.
Mr. Chair, as a point of personal privilege, you happen to have one of the best committee secretaries in the Capitol, so I think she probably got that.
Flattery will get you everywhere with it.
Gets me somewhere.
Any questions on the proposed amendment? Is there any objection to that amendment? We'll show that amendment adopted.
Mr. Chairman, I want to turn now to pages 20, 21, 2021, section 26 of the bill, which is a tremendous concern to me. And it's a tremendous concern to me because it's directly in conflict with Chapter 14, Article 4 of the statutes, the State Rules Act. And so what you have here then it starts off okay, I guess, by saying the director shall issue and follow as required by law all rules and orders necessary to perform the duties administered the applicable provisions of the Tobacco Products Act. Although there's an interesting thing in the title of Section 26 where you have presumption of correctness, which I don't see anywhere down below, and so I'm not sure where that came from. But then where this section goes wrong is that you have in subsection B directives issued by the director. You got rules or written statements of the director of general application of licensees interpreting, exemplifying the statutes to which the rules relate. And then you've got that the rule or proposed rule as a proposed rule filed for public inspection in the office of the director. Well, actually, guess what? We have a Rules Act. We have an Administrative Rules Act, and all of these procedures are well defined in the Rules Act. You don't have to make it up here. And we have a register where we put all the rules into the register so that people can actually track them and they get compiled. And we have notice and we have comment. You have the ability to have an emergency rule if you need it for up to 180 days, but you can't renew it that way. But you can go through the regular rulemaking process during that time. We have, all of this is already defined. And in addition to that, let's see, let's go back to the definition of director. At the beginning, the director of alcohol, so this is person who already exists. Guess what? That person already has rulemaking authority under the Administrative Rules Act. And so you don't need any of this in Section 26. And especially since a rule is something that interprets the law to people outside the agency. And what you have here then is the director doing rulings, interpreting the statutes. No, that's not a ruling, that's a rule. And telling people what it means, but not going through the process that we require already in statute. So, Mr. Chairman, Section 20, I move that Section 26 be struck.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, if I may, my expert witness, to say a few words.
Mr. Chair, listen, Senator Ivy Soto, your reputation on the Rules Act is well known. I would defer to your expertise on that. I would accept any amendment. I accept you. I'm not going to, quibble with it. I just don't want to. I want to make sure that we have the rulemaking authority at the department. So that's my only concern.
All right, further discussion on the proposal? You've got a proposed amendment.
I do, yes.
Section 26.
Yes.
Further discussion on proposed amendment.
Would we still have
Is there any objection to adoption of the amendment? That amendment's adopted.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, to ask the good senator, is just for purposes of people who read and don't see something defined on here, is there a place still to list where the department director, whichever shall have rulemaking authority or something along that line? Because you know, Mr. Chairman, as senator as well as I do, that sometimes people read things literally, and if it ain't listed, they're going to go and do something else. For me, it's for clarification, Mr. Chairman, Senator.
Yes, absolutely. And give me just a moment. I will point out the place. And here, first of all, the director already exists. Is that not the case, Mr. Chairman and senators? Right?
Does my position already exist?
The director of Alcoholic and Beverage Control Division of the Regulation Licensing Department.
Mr. Chair, Senator, yes, my position exists.
Okay. And I just want to make sure you're really in front of us, not just proposed to be in front of us. Nothing. Mr. Rayos, the statutes that create your position, what is that under?
That's governed by the Liquor Control Act, Mr. Chair.
Right.
Senator.
Yeah, and so is that Chapter 60, Article 5A, or is that
6A, 66A.
66A? Okay.
And we have rulemaking authority on that to make rules for the Liquor Control Act. I just want to make sure that if we get rid of Section 26, that we still retain the ability to make rules on the Tobacco Products Act.
Certainly. Give me just a moment. Mr. Chairman, I'll be happy to yield to somebody else who wants to have a little fun while I...
On the same subject or different subject?
On the same or different subject.
Here's what I'm going to suggest. So we're going to take a break shortly for about 30 minutes. We have...
Mr. Chairman, Senator, if I may, on page 12, I think I may have found the answer to my own question. Line 12, blah, 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 requirements of the Tobacco Products Act and the rules promulgated pursuant. I mean, there's some mention of that in there. I just want to make sure, Mr. Chairman, Senators, that we're covered
What line are you looking on, please?
Page 12, line 12. So it's the whole sentence. It starts on line 9. The division shall approve the application, but it does mention too requirements of the Tobacco Products Act and the rules promulgated pursuant to that act. So that may have answered. I just want to, for clarification points.
Thank you. I think that's a reference to rules that may exist. I would suggest that actually.
There's no rules that exist. Mr. Chairman, Senator, this is new, so there are no rules that exist at this point in time.
Right.
So the director would be promulgating rules, and this is something totally new.
Sure. And so, Mr. Chairman, I would suggest that on page 19, line 13, we insert a subsection designator of A, and between lines 18 and 19, we insert subsection B, which would just simply say the director has rulemaking authority pursuant to the State Rules Act.
That's good.
And then get rid of
Right.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Good catch. Thank you.
So Senator Ivey, so we've made a mishmash of this bill already, and I think that we're going to, committee substitute's going to be in order. What I would suggest at this time is rather than trying to go through each amendment and voting on each amendment, that perhaps you identify and flag issues, that the members try and do the same thing, identify and flag issues, and then we give the sponsors an opportunity to meet outside the presence of the committee to try and adopt these in the form of a new committee substitute.
Sure.
I think that's going to be more efficient. I think we're doing a substantial amount of work on the bill, Senator. And
Can I ask one question?
Yeah, Senator Morse.
Thank you, since I don't know, understand cigarettes, so just so I understand, the first recommendation I might have, if you sell a cigarette to a kid, it's a misdemeanor.
We have
If you sell a pack of cigarettes to a kid, cigarettes in a pack, is that a misdemeanor, or are we now talking 20 misdemeanors? And then I'm going to ask the question, and we'll work on this for the substitute, I want to make sure we get penalties right. And if you sell a carton to a kid, is it a misdemeanor, or is it one cigarette multiplied by how many cigarettes are in a carton? If not, we're talking 400 or 500 years in jail.
Mr. Chair, Senator Morse, there is a well-established rule in criminal law that it's called unit of prosecution. So you don't count every cigarette as a separate act. If it's the same act in the same time period and it's all created, it's all part of one continuous act. That's one charging crime. And so, but say for example, if you sold a carton of cigarettes to somebody and then 12 hours later you did it again, then that would be a separate act. There is enough time between them that would be a separate act. But they wouldn't charge each by the cigarette or by the product. It would be one unit of prosecution.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was looking at section 18 on page 16, delivery sales. Mr. Chair and senators and expert, why do we care when the consumer pays the retailer for the shipment? So before he ships the product, he has to receive payment by the certain methods indicated in section 1, 2, or 3.
Mr. Chair, Senator Michael Landon, State Epidemiologist, Department of Health. And it's critical that if there's a delivery sale that we are able to be sure of the identity of the person buying the product. So all this is tied to basically identity verification and that sort of thing.
Thank you, Mr.
And this is a standard model language that is used in these type of licensing provisions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's already, they're already required, though, under penalty of law here, to verify age. So I could see, Mr. Chair, where that would be an issue. You're telling them exactly when they have to receive payment. Payments are, items are shipped all the time. Retailers choose when to bill a person or not. It seems like a problem that would solve itself because it's really two issues. It's verifying identity and then making payment, Mr. Chair. They're not really one and the same. So if you verify identity, fine. What do we care if they mail them a check after, Mr. Chair? Mr. Chair, I would move an amendment.